Twilight Fables, where old fairy tales find new shadows. Tonight we open the tale of Sleeping Beauty, not as you've heard it whispered before, but as it lingers in the darker corners of dream and time. This is the 1,000-year dream. The king's court had been built upon promises of light, chandeliers of crystal, refracted gold upon the banquet hall, and the kingdom's priests declared the child's birth to be a benediction from heaven itself, a daughter radiant and quiet, the only heir to a throne long starved of heirs. She was named Aurora, the dawn, a promise of renewal. But in every kingdom where the sun glows too brightly, shadows grow longer at its edge. The day of her christening, when the bells sang over the village rooftops, 13 silver plates were laid upon a banquet table, but there were 12 golden goblets. The omission was simple, almost laughable, a miscount, an oversight, yet from such small cracks the curse was born. The 13th wise woman, or witch, as whispers called her, came uninvited. Her robes were dusted with the road's black soil, her hair a crown of dried brambles. The court tried to turn her away, but she walked the length of the marble floor, her bare feet leaving stains upon the white stone. She looked at the child, sleeping in silk, and smiled with teeth like broken glass. "You crown her dawn," the woman rasped, "but even dawn bleeds into night. On her 15th birthday, she shall prick her finger on a spindle's point and fall into sleep, and she shall dream, not for 100 years, but until the world forgets her name." Gasps rippled. The king's hand flew to his sword. The queen clutched the infant close, but one of the kinder fairies, arriving late, hurried to soften the curse. "She shall not die," the fairy breathed, "but sleep, and she shall wake with a kiss of true devotion." Yet she had not undone the length of the slumber, not 100 years, not 200, but as long as time would bear her weight. The kingdom burned every spindle, every wheel, every shard of flax and steel. Yet years are rivers, and rivers carve stone. Aurora grew pale and beautiful, her hair the colour of sunlight caught in cobwebs. She walked through the gardens, her presence drawing the gaze of courtiers and the awe of servants. But her eyes always seemed a little too distant, as though she were already halfway to dreaming. The night before her 15th birthday, the palace was heavy with silence. Guards posted at every stairwell, servants forbidden from weaving or spinning, even the smallest pin hidden away. Yet curses do not need doors left open, they seep through cracks. Aurora found herself wandering the high tower, the one her father had ordered locked and barred. The door was ajar. Inside was a woman, bent over a wheel that glimmered faintly with an unnatural sheen. The spindle's tip shone like a star fallen to earth. The woman did not look up. She hummed softly, and her song wove into Aurora's ears, like threads pulling her forward. Curiosity eclipsed fear. Aurora reached. The spindle kissed her skin. The world shattered. She fell backward, yet not onto stone, but into a well of darkness that had no bottom. The last sound she heard before the blackness swallowed her was her mother's scream, faint as a candle guttering in a storm. The kingdom fell into hush. As the fairy's mercy had foretold, she did not die. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breath, her lips still the pale blush of dawn. The king and queen laid her in a bed of carved ivory and draped her with veils. The curse stretched beyond her flesh. The servants who touched her fell where they stood, their eyes rolling back into sleep. The guards at their posts slumped, their torches dropping to smoulder. Horses bowed in their stalls, birds tumbled mid-flight. Even the castle's dogs curled on the steps and closed their eyes. The vines began that night, creeping up the palace walls, thorned and glistening as though wet with dew or blood. By dawn, the castle was sealed in a crown of briar. From the outside, travellers whispered of it. Farmers crossed themselves when shadows lengthened near the valley. The kingdom, once a beacon of light, became a scar upon the earth, a mound of silence where only the thorns stirred. Generations passed, stories stretched. Some said the princess was a corpse, eternally young and waiting to be kissed by devils. Others claimed she had become the bride of sleep itself, her soul married to dream. None knew what was happening inside, for Aurora had not merely slept, she dreamed. At first, her dream was simple: gardens in spring, endless banquets, laughter echoing through marbled halls. She walked through halls lined with mirrors, yet every reflection was slightly wrong. Eyes too wide, smiles too sharp, a second's delay between her movements and theirs. She told herself it was only dream. She told herself she would wake, but as years stretched into decades, her dreams began to twist. The banquets rotted, the food writhed with maggots, the mirrors cracked, and from the other side, the reflections did not shatter, but pressed against the glass, begging with soundless mouths. Sometimes she saw herself lying in the ivory bed, a shadow watching from the corner. Sometimes she dreamed she woke, only to find every face in the castle turned toward her in unblinking silence. When she screamed, no sound came. When she wept, her tears burned like candle wax, and still she could not wake. The centuries bent around her, pressing her deeper into the labyrinth of dream. Outside, the world changed. Empires rose and fell. Languages were forgotten and new ones born. The castle remained, thorns thickening, bones of wanderers caught in their grip. Knights, princes, and beggars alike tried their hand at reaching the fabled beauty. None returned. Inside, Aurora's dream deepened. She no longer knew if she was herself or only the memory of a self. Her name dissolved on her tongue. Her body felt stretched, drawn thin across endless landscapes of nightmare. She saw oceans without end, filled with faces just beneath the waves, eyes staring upward. She walked forests where trees whispered her secrets in voices she did not remember sharing. She lay in beds of silk that slowly transformed into webs, the spiders crawling from her hair. She dreamed of kisses, many kisses, lips pressed to hers, cold, burning, monstrous. None woke her. Instead, each kiss sank her deeper, tethering her to figures she could not name, whose hands lingered on her too long, whose teeth grazed her skin. Somewhere beyond the dream, centuries turned, and Aurora was still dreaming. Her body in the ivory bed remained unchanged, skin smooth, lips still the hue of morning. Dust lay thick upon her lashes, but the pulse of life, slow, almost imperceptible, still beat beneath her breast. Yet her soul was far from that chamber. She wandered. In one dream, she stood in a banquet hall, every goblet filled not with wine, but blood. The courtiers raised their cups, their mouths stretching too wide, red dripping down their chins as they toasted her eternal sleep. In another, she was locked within a coffin of glass, yet the coffin stretched for miles. She pressed her palms against its walls, and her reflection pressed back, except the reflection's eyes were open when hers were shut, shut when hers were open. She began to wonder if perhaps she was the reflection. The thorns outside did not sleep either. With each passing decade, they grew thicker, feeding upon the bodies of those who tried to cut through. Knights from far-off kingdoms came, spurred by songs of a maiden whose beauty could be theirs. Their blood watered the roots. Some were dragged in whole, swallowed by the vines, bones later spit out like gristle. Others hung from the briars, impaled, their armour rusting under rain. Villagers whispered that the thorns groaned at night, like sleepers shifting in their dreams. Sometimes, if the wind was right, one could hear a woman singing within, not a song of joy, but a low, keening lullaby, as though the castle itself tried to rock the world to sleep. In the 2nd century of dream, Aurora found herself in a corridor with no end. Doors lined its walls, each painted a different colour. She felt compelled to open them, though she feared what waited. Behind one door was her mother, the queen, her face serene, but when Aurora touched her hand, the skin sloughed away, revealing a skull that whispered, "Wake, and you will kill us all." Behind another was a cradle. She peered inside, expecting a child, but within lay a spindle, its tip gleaming with a single drop of her blood that never dried. The drop pulsed like a heart. Behind a third, she found herself sleeping, 1,000 auroras stretched into infinity, each lying on the same ivory bed. Some looked peaceful, others writhed, their mouths open in silent screams. The longer she lingered, the more the sleeping auroras began to stir. One opened her eyes and met Aurora's gaze. "You are the dream," it hissed. "We are the real." Aurora slammed the door shut and fled down the corridor, but the sound of footsteps followed, her own, doubled, tripled, echoing after her. Outside, the world turned. The kingdom that had once held her name dissolved into history. The people who lived on its borders remembered only the thorns. Maps were redrawn, borders shifted, the castle vanished into myth, a cautionary tale for children. But still, sometimes, wanderers spoke of it. A shepherd claimed he had seen the tower spires through the briar, glinting like black teeth. A soldier said he heard laughter in his dreams after sleeping near the valley. A monk wrote of visions of a pale woman whose eyes were black pits, who begged him to kiss her awake. He slit his own throat the next day. In her 3rd century of dreaming, Aurora's mind began to fracture into layers. She dreamed of princes who came to her chamber, each fair and bold, each pressing lips to hers. But when she opened her eyes, their faces melted like wax, dripping onto her chest, burning her skin. She dreamed of children calling her mother, but when she embraced them, they crumbled into dust in her arms, their cries fading into laughter that belonged to no child. She dreamed of the spindle again and again, but it was no longer only a spindle. Sometimes it was a fang, sometimes it was a tongue, sometimes it was the root of the thorn itself, piercing her finger anew, each time pulling her deeper, and still she slept. 1,000 years is long enough for gods to die, and so they did. Kingdoms crumbled, faiths faded, but Aurora endured. The thorns, now thicker than castle walls, pulsed faintly at night, as though with breath. Travellers reported seeing faces within the vines, their features twisted in agony, eyes half closed as if still alive. One prince, braver or more foolish than others, came with fire. He burned a path into the outer briar, the smoke curling black into the heavens. The thorns screamed, not the crack of wood, but true screaming, like human throats. He pressed onward. When his men hesitated, he cut them down himself, the firelight flickering in his eyes. He was close. He could hear her singing, but the flames guttered out. The vines closed again, faster than flesh heals, and when they did, the screams did not stop. They grew louder. For months after, smoke seeped from the briars, though no fire was seen. In her 5th century, Aurora ceased to hope for waking. The dream had become all she knew, all she was. Her memories of a real bed, a real crown, real parents, these had dimmed into shadows. She remembered them only as phantoms in the dream, and even those phantoms began to lie. Her mother sometimes told her she had died centuries ago, and Aurora must remain in dream so the kingdom could endure. Her father sometimes begged her to sleep longer, because the waking world had no place for her. Her own reflection told her she was not Aurora at all, but the curse itself. The cruelest moments were when she dreamed she awoke. She would rise from the ivory bed, the dust falling from her hair, and the castle would be as it once was. She would run through the halls, find her parents waiting, hear the laughter of servants. She would almost believe, almost, until she blinked and the walls rotted away, her parents' faces peeled from bone, and she realized she had never risen from the bed at all. These dreams of waking tormented her most, for they planted a seed of fear she had never known. What if one day she did awaken and found the nightmare followed her into daylight? The 6th century came like a tide Aurora could not resist. She no longer marked time by days or years, but by the shifting weight of her dreams. What had once been visions confined within her mind now began to fracture the boundary between sleep and waking. She did not know it, but outside the briars, her dreams had begun to ripple across the land. Men and women sleeping in nearby villages woke screaming, their eyes wide with terror. They told of walking through endless halls filled with doors they dared not open, of feasts where the food crawled, of a woman with hair like sunlight and eyes as black as wells. They had never seen Aurora, yet they dreamed her all the same. The priests declared it a plague. The monks called it a visitation of demons. The villagers named it the sleeper's sorrow, and it spread. Those who dreamed her too many times were found wandering at dawn, blood dripping from their fingers, their faces scratched as if by thorns. Others were found staring at the horizon, whispering in voices not their own. Some walked into the forest and never returned. Inside, Aurora herself was changing. In her 7th century of dream, the castle that once held her shifted form with every breath. Its walls lengthened into corridors that turned back upon themselves. Its windows looked out into nothing but black seas. Doors opened not to rooms, but to maws lined with teeth. The servants she once saw in her softer dreams had become grotesques, their limbs bent the wrong way, their mouths stitched shut with golden thread, their eyes dripping with candle wax. They hovered around her, sometimes bowing, sometimes pointing, sometimes simply watching as she tried to flee, but always, no matter how she ran, she returned to her bed. The ivory frame stood like a throne, and in it she lay, still, pale, asleep, watching herself. And something in that version of her, still and sleeping, seemed more real than she was. Sometimes the sleeping Aurora whispered. The whispers bled into the walls, into the halls, into the bones of the castle. Words she did not remember learning, words that made her mouth taste of iron when she spoke them back. You are not asleep, you are the dream. Outside the thorns trembled. Travellers passing near the valley swore they saw the briars move as though wind stirred them, though no breeze touched the grass. The vines bent toward one another, tangling tighter, their barbs glistening wetly. One soldier reported seeing an eye open within the thicket, not a trick of shadow, an eye large and golden, gazing at him until he dropped his torch and fled. When he returned with comrades, they found nothing, but they said the air was thick, like the inside of a chest that had not breathed for too long. The land around the castle withered, fields grew stunted, livestock birthed dead offspring, and children whispered in their sleep always the same name, Aurora. No one remembered who Aurora was. They only knew she must not wake. In the dream, Aurora began to lose her shape. At first, it was her shadow. She noticed it stretching away from her, moving when she stood still, bending at angles her body did not. Then it was her face. When she touched her cheeks, in polished glass, the reflection's features shifted into strangers. A hollow-eyed woman, a grinning girl with too many teeth, a corpse with lips sewn shut. Finally, it was her body itself. Sometimes she would look down and see her hands were bone. Sometimes her legs were rooted into the floor, thorns sprouting from her skin. Sometimes she was still a child, pricking her finger again and again, each drop of blood blooming into a flower that reeked of decay. She tried to scream, but the air in the dream was too heavy. Her voice never rose higher than a whisper, and yet the whispers carried. They seeped beyond the walls of her dream. Villagers began reporting voices in their houses at night, not in their ears, but in their walls. A girl's voice, soft, calling them by name. Some answered. Those who did were found asleep the next morning, their eyes open, their lips moving soundlessly. Their bodies could not be roused. They breathed, yes, but shallowly, as though drowning. When doctors pressed mirrors to their mouths, faint words appeared in the condensation. I am not asleep. Some were buried alive by frightened kin, yet even underground, the whispers did not stop. The earth around their graves trembled as though something beneath sought to rise. Within the castle, Aurora stood before the spindle again. It appeared in her dreams, without warning, sometimes in the middle of a feast, balanced atop a platter of meat, sometimes at the bottom of stairwells, waiting like a nail in the dark, sometimes in her own hand, though she did not remember grasping it. Each time it gleamed with that same drop of her blood. She tried to cast it aside, she tried to break it, but it always returned, and with each return the drop of blood grew. What had been a bead became a pearl, then an apple, then a heart. It pulsed faintly, beating in rhythm with hers, and sometimes, when she pressed her fingers to it, she swore she could hear someone else's heart beating back, not her own. 1,000 years of dream cannot be endured without change. Aurora, once dawn, now felt herself darkening. She could not tell if the dream had grown into her or if she had grown into the dream. Her name no longer tasted familiar. Her face was no longer hers. When she walked through her endless corridors, the walls bent toward her as if listening. The grotesques bowed lower, muttering in a tongue she almost understood. And the bed, the ivory bed, no longer seemed a prison. It seemed a throne, calling her back, whispering to her to lie down and never rise again. And she was tempted, for the dream was no longer only a cage. It was beginning to feel like dominion. But terror has a strange way of becoming awe. Pilgrims began to gather near the valley's edge, not to conquer the briars, but to kneel before them. They whispered prayers to the sleeper, begged her to intercede in their dreams, kissed the soil as though her breath warmed it, and sometimes, just sometimes, the sleeper answered. Those who prayed woke to visions. They spoke of golden-haired women, whispering secrets of the harvest, charms against illness, glimpses of lovers long dead. Some called her saint, others goddess. The whispers of priests spread. She dreams, and through her dream the world endures. But the truth was darker. The sleeper did not grant, she consumed. Every prayer deepened the tangle of her dream. Every whispered devotion made her corridors longer, her grotesques more solid, her false awakenings more cruel. And those who prayed too long began to lose themselves. Their eyes filmed white, their bodies weakened, and in their sleep they smiled with mouths that whispered her name, Aurora. Within the castle, Aurora felt the weight of these voices. At first, she thought them fragments of her own mind, but soon she realized, no, these were not her dreams. They belonged to strangers. She walked halls littered with their memories, a child's broken toy, a widow's wedding ring, a soldier's bloody sword. She touched them and saw through their eyes. She felt their deaths, their grief, their hunger. They became part of her. The castle was no longer hers alone. It was swelling, expanding, filled with echoes of lives she had never lived. And every time a pilgrim whispered to her, she whispered back, though she did not mean to. Words slipped from her lips like threads pulled from a tapestry. Words she did not know, words they carried home, repeating them in their sleep until their neighbours shuddered. Sleep deeper, sleep longer, sleep forever. One night, or what passed for night in her labyrinthine dream, Aurora came to the banquet hall again. This time, the long table was not set with rotting feasts. It was lined with bodies, men in armour, women in rags, children, all of them stretched upon the wood, their eyes closed, their chests faintly rising and falling. As she watched, their eyes snapped open together, and they spoke as one. Wake, and we end. Sleep, and we live. Their voices shook the hall, rattling the chandeliers, until crystal fell like rain. Aurora screamed and ran, but when she turned, the walls were gone. She stood instead before her own bed, and this time, the Aurora lying within it opened her eyes. They were not blue, not green, not any colour she remembered. They were mirrors. You dream too much, the other Aurora whispered. The dream is stronger than you. Aurora staggered backward, shaking her head. No, I will wake. I must wake. The mirrored eyes blinked slowly. You will not wake. You will become. Outside, the briars pulsed. Farmers, living at the border, awoke one morning to find their fields overrun, not with ordinary vines, but briars sprouting overnight, black thorns sharp as daggers. They spread in circles, curling into shapes that resembled faces. The livestock refused to graze near them. Children cried when they looked at them too long. By the next moon, the shapes were clearer, not faces, bodies, dozens of them, arms reaching, mouths open, frozen in silent screams. Some said the sleeper's dream had leaped too far. Others claimed the briars were remembering every pilgrim, every night, every wanderer who had come too close. But the most frightening whispers came from the children. The thorns are sleeping, they said. When they wake, they'll walk. In her 9th century, Aurora felt no separation between herself and the land. When the briars grew thicker, she felt it as pain in her veins. When they flowered white blossoms, she smelled it in her hair. When they devoured men, she tasted the iron of blood on her tongue. She understood then. The curse had not locked her away. It had rooted her into the earth. She was the dream, yes, but she was also the thorns. And the thorns were hungry. The suitors had ceased. The pilgrims came only to worship. The world had changed too far to remember kings or crowns. Yet still, sometimes, a fool wandered close. One was a poet, young and pale, who had heard the legends of the sleeper. He claimed he sought her not for her beauty, but for her story. He cut into the briars with a silver blade, bleeding from his arms as the thorns tore him open. But he pressed forward, his lips moving ceaselessly in verse, begging the sleeper to let him sing her name. Aurora felt him in her dream, a new presence, soft, bright, a candle in her endless corridors. She followed it, curious. When she reached him, she found him kneeling, his body torn and trembling, but his eyes alight with something she had not seen in centuries, hope. He opened his mouth and sang her name, not as curse, not as prayer, but as if he believed she was real. And for a heartbeat, Aurora almost remembered who she was. But the mirrored Aurora at the bed leaned forward and whispered, "He sings only because he is lost. When his voice dies, you will feed." And the poet's voice cracked. Blood filled his throat. He fell, and the thorns closed over him. Aurora tasted his song like honey on her tongue, and she wept. The 1000th year approached like a shadow, so vast it blotted out even the memory of dawn. By then, no border kingdom laid claim to the valley. No map marked its contours. Travellers avoided it altogether, speaking of it only in mutters, like men speak of illness that kills without warning. The briars stretched for miles, visible even from the hills, knotted, black, a vast scar across the earth. Yet though men avoided it, their dreams could not. The sleeper's reach had grown. At first, it was only those who dwelled near the valley who dreamed of her. Whispers in the dark, corridors without end, the spindle gleaming in shadows. But now, even kings across oceans found her face in their sleep. Merchants on distant shores woke weeping with her name on their lips. Sailors at sea swore they heard a woman singing beneath the waves. Though no woman lived there, the dream had stretched beyond her castle walls, beyond her country, beyond her age. All sleepers were her kingdom now. Aurora did not fully understand when she crossed the threshold. There had been centuries of torment, centuries of false awakenings and decaying banquets, centuries of other selves staring back from mirrors. Yet now she walked her corridors with a strange calm. The grotesques no longer frightened her. They bowed when she passed, scraping the floor with needle-bent limbs. The chandeliers no longer rained glass, but lit themselves at her command. Even the endless doors, once traps, opened more easily when she willed it, and behind each door, always another dreamer, a pilgrim, a king, a child. She stepped through, and she saw through their eyes. She wore their skins. She whispered in their ears. Sleep longer, she told them. Sleep with me. And they obeyed. Some never woke again. One night, Aurora stood before the spindle once more. It was enormous now, taller than she, gleaming with the same drop of blood that had become a heart, a globe, a sun. It pulsed so brightly, she shielded her eyes. "Do you remember me?" she whispered. The mirrored Aurora appeared at her side, silent. "Am I your prisoner?" Aurora asked. "Or your heir?" The mirrored self smiled faintly. "You are both, and when you wake, you will be neither. You will be dream alone." Aurora touched the spindle. Her blood drop met the larger one. The dream shook like a storm, and far away, 1,000 sleepers woke at once, screaming. Outside, the land had grown uncanny. Night lingered longer than it should. The moon hung low, refusing to set. Livestock birthed creatures half-formed, with skin like bark or eyes that gleamed gold. Villagers reported sleepwalking into rivers, never to rise. A new faith arose in the cities. Devoted to her, they called themselves the Dreamers of the Dawn. They painted her with thorns for a crown, her eyes black with starlight, her lips parted as if whispering. Their creed was simple: the world is only pain, the dream is mercy, to wake is sin. They welcomed her nightmares, they carved thorns into their flesh, they drank infusions of poppy to sleep longer, to drift nearer to her, and when they slept, they joined her halls. She saw them, she touched their hands, she led them deeper, her kingdom swelled. Aurora did not fear any more. The horrors of her earlier centuries seemed like childish terrors. She had believed herself trapped, but now she knew the truth. The curse was never a prison. It was a seed, and she was blooming. Her corridors grew palatial, vast as continents. Her banquet halls stretched beyond horizons. Her grotesques multiplied into legions. When she spoke, the stones carried her voice like veins. When she sang, whole villages stirred in their sleep. And when she kissed a dreamer, their body in the waking world exhaled one last time and never drew breath again. She felt their deaths as sweetness, but not all came willingly. One night, descendant of a line of kings who had once ruled lands now dust, believed he could end the curse. He carried no sword, no shield, only a prayer etched into his breastplate. He entered the valley, walking barefoot through the briars. The thorns pierced him, bled him, yet did not drink him. He pressed onward, each step a hymn, and Aurora felt him, a bright presence cutting through her corridors, glowing like a blade of light. She tried to bar the doors. She tried to twist the halls, but still he advanced, whispering her name with each step, not as prayer, not as plea, but as command. Aurora, wake! The mirrored Aurora hissed. If you wake, you will kill us all. Aurora faltered. She remembered her mother's voice, her father's embrace. She remembered sunlight, real sunlight, not this endless dream light. Could she wake? Did she want to? The knight reached her chamber. He saw her lying upon the ivory bed, pale as dawn. He leaned forward, his lips trembling toward hers, and Aurora saw both paths at once. One where his kiss roused her, breaking the curse, sunlight pouring through the castle as she gasped her first waking breath in 1,000 years, and one where she devoured him, pulling him into her dream, making his light another thread in her growing dominion. Both futures trembled in her grasp. The mirrored Aurora leaned close and whispered, "You are not the one who wakes. You are the one who dreams." And Aurora's lips parted. The thorns groaned as though something vast and ancient stirred within them. The vines parted not by wind or storm, but by intention, as though granting passage to one who had been expected across ages. For the first time in centuries, someone entered the briar-enshrouded castle, not a desperate villager or an errant knight who vanished screaming into the brambles, but a figure who bore the weight of kingdoms on his shoulders. He was called many things in the scattered fragments of oral tradition: the wandering heir, the ashen prince, the crown of splinters. His kingdom had crumbled long before his birth, erased in the silent wars that flared during Aurora's centuries of sleep. His father left him nothing but bones of a palace and fragments of a name, yet the stories of the sleeping princess in the cursed castle reached even him, passed down as warnings and prophecies whispered in taverns and at dying hearths. Unlike the fools before him, this prince had not come with sword alone. He had studied the curse in grim tomes, speaking with blind prophets and withered witches who lived on the fringes of burned villages. He knew the curse was more than a spindle's prick or a jealous fairy's spite. It was alive, feeding, growing, and he had not come to save the princess. He had come to inherit her dream. The air shifted when he stepped beyond the final wall of thorns. It was thick with fragrance, blood, honey, and rot braided together in impossible sweetness. The castle loomed, not ruined, but preserved. Banners still hung from the walls, though they shimmered faintly as if made of gossamer threads. Windows flickered with lights, but no one moved within them. The prince's eyes narrowed. This is not stone, he realized. The castle had become an extension of her sleep, woven not with mortar and granite, but with the substance of 1,000 years of dreaming. The doors yielded at his touch, their wood pulsing faintly like veins beneath pale skin. Inside, he found the hall where dancers still twirled, court musicians played, but their hands no longer touched instruments. The music spilled directly from their mouths in low, unearthly tones. The dancers turned in endless circles, feet scraping grooves into the marble, eyes shut, faces blissfully vacant. They were dream-born, fragments of those who had once lived in the castle, stitched together from memory and nightmare. And yet, when the prince passed, some of their heads twitched, as though some faint consciousness recognized him. A woman in a gown of emerald lace broke her dance to whisper his name. He froze. No one should know his name here. The woman's lips did not move again, but the whisper lingered, as though the castle itself had spoken. The deeper he went, the stranger it became. He passed through feasting halls, where endless banquets rotted on silver platters, meat crawling with pale worms that raised their heads like serpents. He passed galleries where portraits wept black tears, and gardens inside the walls, where roses had grown thorn stems as tall as trees, each blossom sighing faintly as though trying to speak, and in every chamber he felt it, the pulse of the dream, tied to her, Aurora, the girl who had slept too long. At last he found the great stairwell that wound upward to her chamber. Each step was furred with moss, but when he placed his foot down, the moss whispered, not words, but voices, hundreds, thousands of them, muttering as if urging him forward. Some begged him to flee, others promised him glory. When he reached the top, the doors to her chamber were already open. Aurora lay upon her bed, the same figure spoken of in endless tales, golden hair, lips like dusk, skin unblemished, untouched by time. But around her the air was wrong. It bent in subtle ways, as though he were standing in the eye of a storm. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, and threads of light curved where they should have run straight. Her sleep warped everything. The prince stepped closer. Her chest rose and fell shallowly, but her eyelids trembled. He realized she was not asleep in the sense the legends had claimed. She was trapped, caught between waking and dreaming, her body a vessel, but her mind wandering 1,000 shifting landscapes. And she sensed him. Aurora's lips moved faintly, as though she were speaking through layers of silk and water. He leaned close. "Who are you?" she whispered, though her eyes remained shut. Her voice was like stone crumbling in moonlight, old and brittle, yet strangely melodic. "I am the heir to nothing," he said softly, "the last of a broken crown. I came not to wake you, but to claim you." Her brow furrowed. "Claim?" "Yes, you dream too much, princess. 1,000 years of wandering the void, too much for one soul to bear. But I have studied. I have carved my spirit until it is sharp enough to cut through shadow. Let me take some of it. Share your dream, and together we may rule what you have created." For a long moment, nothing stirred but the faint rustling of her breath. Then her lips curved in something that might have been a smile or the shadow of one. "You do not understand," she murmured. "The dream is not mine. It feeds on me. To touch it is to be eaten." The prince's hand hovered above hers. "Then let us be eaten together." The instant his skin touched hers, the world collapsed. The bed dissolved into mist. The chamber shattered, fragments of stone spinning away into an infinite abyss. He fell, not with his body, but with his soul, tumbling into a void where stars pulsed like open eyes. Aurora stood before him, no longer the girl on the bed, but a figure vast and terrible, her gown woven of galaxies, her hair falling as rivers of light, her face flickered, young maiden, old crone, skeleton, babe, changing with every heartbeat. "You entered willingly," she said, and her voice boomed across eternity. "Then you are mine." The prince should have felt fear. Instead, he laughed. His spirit cracked, splintering into shards of light, but he held himself together by sheer will. "Yes," he cried, "yours. Let me see what you have seen." Aurora reached out, and the dream swallowed him whole. For the first time in centuries, she opened her eyes. The prince's body lay beside her on the bed, his face serene, but his eyes were glassy and lifeless. His soul had not returned. She had devoured it, or the dream had. through her, and yet she felt different, stronger. Some part of him remained, woven into her essence, his ambition, his hunger, his fractured crown, all now stitched into the fabric of her dreaming. Aurora rose from the bed, her bare feet silent on the warped floor. The castle shivered. She was no longer merely the dreamer, she was becoming the dream itself. The castle had become a cathedral of silence, where once music spilled from the vaulted halls, now only the faint rustle of dust-filled air moved among the shadows. Aurora walked through it barefoot, her skin pale as carved ivory, her hair loose about her shoulders, like trailing rivers of night. She no longer remembered how many times she had crossed these corridors. Each step echoed, yet no echo felt her own. The dream within which she lived had long since unravelled from reality. She had tried once to tell herself that the difference still mattered, that there was a threshold somewhere between waking and dreaming, but the 1,000-year dream had swallowed such distinctions. She was both sleeping and awake, both maiden and corpse, both captive and queen. It began with the feast. The long banquet table stretched impossibly far, its surface laden with dishes that steamed with aromas both sweet and rancid, a roasted swan with garnet eyes, a pheasant dripping wine instead of blood, breads that sighed like living lungs when torn apart, candles burned, though their flames were cold blue, and leaned not with draughts, but with unseen breath. Her suitors were there, the princes who had sought her hand across centuries. They had never survived the briars, yet now they sat upright, each in finery that had rotted into dust, their crowns sliding from skeletal brows. Flesh clung only where it had not yet been feasted upon by worms. Their sockets turned toward her in silent devotion. At the head of the table sat the woman she once thought of as her fairy godmother, though her face was never steady. Sometimes it was kind and luminous, sometimes cracked and shriveled, sometimes it stretched into a mask of thorns, hollow-eyed and smiling with too many teeth. She lifted her goblet and raised it toward Aurora. "Come, child," the not-mother said, her voice layered with echoing tones. "The feast is yours. You have slept so long, longer than kings, longer than kingdoms. You must eat." Aurora moved without will, drawn to the place set for her. A plate shimmered with food that shifted every time she blinked. Meat, then fruit, then something grey and shuddering, then a slice of cake frosted with pale pink that smelled faintly of blood. Her fingers lifted the fork. One of the skeletal princes leaned close, his jaw falling open as though in reverence or hunger. "Eat, so that we may rest," he whispered in a voice dry as dust. Another rasped, "Eat, so that we may rise." Aurora set the fork down. "No," she said. Her voice trembled, but the sound startled her. It had been so long since she had heard her own defiance. The Not Mother tilted her head, and in her expression Aurora saw the shape of endless years pressing down upon her. You cannot refuse. To dream without feeding is to wither, and if you wither, all that has grown from you will wither as well. Do you not feel them? The roots of the dream twined through the earth, drawing sustenance from the world. Aurora did feel it. She felt the vines in her blood, the briars wrapping her veins, the way her heartbeat echoed in the stone foundations of the castle. Her body was no longer wholly hers. If she allowed herself to starve within this dream, she would not only kill herself, she would take the castle and all trapped within it, down into final ruin. The food shifted again. Now it was the faces of villagers she half remembered, the laughter of girls she had once played with before the curse, the kind eyes of her father, the king. Their forms lay sliced upon the porcelain, steaming as though fresh from the oven. Aurora gagged, turning away, but the skeletal princes began to chant. The sound was not song, but the dry rattle of bones. Eat, eat, eat. Her Not Mother's smile widened, too wide, the skin tearing at the corners of her mouth, as though she were a doll coming apart at the seams. Deny hunger long enough, and hunger will devour you instead. Aurora fled the table. She ran down the long banquet hall, her breath ragged, though the air was heavy as syrup, and each step carried her no nearer to the door. Behind her, the voices of the dead princes rose higher. Eat, princess. Feed the dream. Feed us. The Not Mother's voice cut through them all, calm and merciless. You cannot wake unless you taste. Aurora slammed her palms against the great oaken doors at the end of the hall. At first, they would not yield. Then, with a groan like something in agony, they opened outward. She stumbled into the courtyard, but the courtyard had changed. The roses that once overran the stones had grown taller than towers, their blooms the size of carriages, their petals slick and shining like wet flesh. They opened as she passed, revealing centres filled with teeth or eyes or tiny curled forms that might have been infants or might have been nothing human at all. And through their twisting stems, Aurora saw the bones of all who had tried to reach her. Knights in rusted armour, peasants with sickles, would-be heroes who had believed their love or courage could outlast the curse. All had been absorbed into the garden, their skeletons held upright in vines, their empty gazes turned skyward in prayer. Aurora pressed her hands to her face. Is this me? Did I do this? A wind stirred the monstrous roses, and they whispered in many voices, children and old women and soldiers and beasts. You have dreamed us, you have fed us, we are yours. Her knees buckled. She wanted to deny them, wanted to scream that she had never asked for this. But the truth was heavier than denial. She had slept too long, she had dreamed too long, and the dream had grown hungry, and still the knight, the prince of splintered crowns, stood at the centre, his eyes steady, his hand extended. Though his body was battered and pale, his spirit shone with the faintest ember of hope. "You can wake," he said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it cut through the whispering roses like a blade. "You do not have to be this god of nightmare. You can rise and the world will breathe again. You can be yourself." Aurora shook her head. "I have fed too long. I have dreamed too much. This world, this dream, it is mine. It cannot be undone. It will not allow me to leave." He stepped closer. "It will allow you if you choose. You are not the curse. You are the sleeper. You are the dreamer. You can decide." The roses leaned closer. They whispered, hissed, cried, "Do not awaken. Do not leave. Feed, feed us." Aurora's chest ached with 1,000 years of longing and despair, the weight of countless souls pressing against her skin, whispering their hunger into her ears. And then she saw herself, the mirrored Aurora, the 1,000-year version, standing upon the bed in the palace, no longer asleep, but towering, luminous, terrifying. She held in her hands a globe of light, the spindle's drop of blood, grown into the shape of the world itself. "You are the dream," it said. Its voice was both hers and not hers, layered with echoes. "You have become everything. You have no choice now. To wake is to destroy yourself and all you have dreamed." Aurora faltered, caught between the light of the prince's hope and the gravity of her own power. Her hands trembled. She felt the pulse of the dream in her veins, in her heartbeat, in the whispering roses, in the very air of the valley. It sang to her, sweet and terrible, offering dominion, eternity, hunger fulfilled. And yet there was a memory, a faint, distant flicker, a sun rising over a real field, wind in real hair, laughter she had known as a child, the kiss of sunlight on her cheek, her mother's voice calling her name, her father's hand in hers. She exhaled. The prince took a step forward. "Close your eyes, breathe, let go of the hunger that binds you." Aurora did. She felt the vines coil tighter, felt the rose's eyes widen, the whispers grow shrill. They wanted her to stay, they wanted her to feed. And then she felt the dream start to unravel, slowly at first, like threads being pulled from a tapestry. The banquet hall crumbled, the grotesques turned to dust, the 1,000 auroras lying on beds across the centuries blinked out, fading like embers. The corridors shortened, the castle trembled and shook, and then stilled. Aurora opened her eyes. She was in her bed, dust-covered, golden hair, tangled. Light streamed through a window she remembered, but had never seen in 1,000 years. The spindle lay beside her, dull and harmless. Her arms trembled. Her legs felt the weight of flesh again. not centuries of dream. The roses of the courtyard were gone. The briars beyond the walls had retreated, leaving only thornless hedges and stone paths. The air smelled of wind and grass. Birds called outside. The world was waking. The prince knelt beside her bed, alive, real. His hand reached for hers. Careful, you're awake, he said softly. Aurora let herself smile, fragile as dawn. She had awoken, but she was changed. Every dream, every horror, every whispered soul remained inside her, threads woven into her essence. She could never forget. She could never be entirely herself again. But she was awake, and the world breathed with her. She rose from the bed. The light filled her, and though she carried the weight of 1,000-year nightmare, she carried also the knowledge that even dreams, this long and deep, could end. Aurora stepped into the morning. The dream had ended, and she was alive.